thank you, Dr. George, sir, and Dr. Sajida for a wonderful presentation. And now it's the time for discussion from the house and as well as from Zoom. So you can use the chance now, the opportunity now.
Thank you, Dr. George and Dr. Sajida for wonderful presentation. I have, in fact, a few questions to Dr. George as well as Dr. Sajida. First of all, I would like to ask, sir, you have mentioned the person Phineas Gage on that frontal lobe accident, and he was proven that it has created his behavioral change. In fact, his entirely different with so coming into a practical scenario in here. So if we have or a person undergoes similar kind of accidents in road accidents or anything, and which affects his frontal lobe kind of things, and undergo major surgery or something like that due to that case, as well as some tumors or something like that, it is happening in life. So in those scenarios, so after the surgery or after the accident, you mentioned it was happened in 17th century. So over this period of time, the medical science, especially the neurosciences, do we have any hope after such kind of surgeries? Is there any improvements through medication or anything? The cognition ability can be improved after the. So you said it was an example. That is one of my first question.
Thank you, sir, for that very insightful question. I'm more happy because you have noted all the fine points so well. I rarely, see somebody who has listened with so much of intent. So just to come to a more specific answer to your question, this story of Phineas Gage having happened in the 17th century, let us look at it from the context of that time and then compare it with the current era. So that was a time when people hardly knew anything about the brain, and you had no mechanisms to see what is happening inside the skull. Today, we are living in an era where we have got, very advanced imaging technology like the CT scan, the MRI. So here you only have a vision or a picture of something going through below the skull and coming out from the top of the skull. What lies in between, medical science has no clue about it. So there's no way you can assess the extent of injury. If the same thing had happened in the current era, you would be better prepared, you would be better planned before you undertake any sort of a reparative or a surgical procedure. So you know exactly what is the trajectory, the path, what lobe of the brain is affected. You can in fact even predict how much of recovery is likely to happen. So 2 centuries beyond this incident, today perhaps we may be, we might be able to alter this outcome to a great extent. That time also it was not a fatal outcome. It was just that Phineas Gage had a significant alteration in his personality, which affected both, his own life as well as the life of people around him. Now, coming to a question on, how people in the current era. Now, we are living in an era where it is extremely common to have injuries of the brain. You have road traffic accidents. You have got many sort of injuries of the brain, which can sometimes be very mild. Sometimes the brain is a very critical and a very, very delicate structure. That is why it is the organ in the body which is most protected. You have got a nice, bony case, that is the skull, inside which this delicate organ is preserved. So you really don't need a bullet to go across to cause injury to the brain. You just have a violent shaking of the head. That itself is sufficient to cause significant injury to the brain, which can be even fatal at times. So, just a blunt impact without having anything penetrating across can still cause significant injury. But what we need to understand is, compared to other organs or other tissue systems in the body, the brain has got very limited reparative capacity or a capacity to heal. Now, if you have, a scar on your foot, you have an injury on your knee, or you have got a bone which is broken, you have, a reparative procedure which takes place, a repair happens, and within few weeks of time, it's almost back to normal. You might not even see a significant scar, but the brain has got very limited capacity to gain back its function. At the same time, the capacity, though limited, is still, very significant. So over a period of time, repair happens. And when repair happens, all these, what I said, that is a sort of brain plasticity, takes over. Like, for example, if you have got a patient or an individual with a stroke or a brain injury, now you have the speech area damaged. So what probably happens is that there is some repair of the speech area which keeps on happening. And when that repair happens, the other surrounding areas which are around the speech area, that is the Broca's area or the Wernicke's area, also acquire some form of speech function. So when you do physiotherapy for a weak limb, you actually regenerate the function in the surrounding areas of the brain. You teach the surrounding areas to gain some form of command or functional potential. That is called functional reorganization, or in other words, brain plasticity. So what we need to understand is that we are dealing with a very delicate organ. So definitely preventing injury, that's why all this hue and cry, or all this public awareness about wearing helmets and doing everything to prevent injury. So prevention definitely is the first way forward. But then if it has happened, what we need to understand is that with the progress in medical science, there is hope. And that hope is, ever increasing as medical science expands into newer frontiers. So thank you very much for answering the question, and I hope I have answered it effectively.
Yeah, thank you so much, Doctor. Sir, and it was a wonderful answer. Related to that one, I have one more question to you, sir. So the thing is like, so the brain's generation of the new neurons will degrade. I heard. I'm not very sure. I'm asking that question to you. So degrade over the period of time or age increases. At the same time, making the new connections and the plasticity won't be going low as such. So it can go even if we can maintain through a lot of activities and so something like that. I'm not very sure. I'm asking, is it possible like that to making the new connections and retaining the plasticity and increasing the plasticity even after a certain age with some activities? Could you please answer that? Take it up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's a again, a very relevant question. So as we understand that the brain or the neural tissue has reached a certain extent of growth, just even at the stage of when the child is born. And almost the critical period for neural development is perhaps even before the woman realizes that she has conceived. So, there is a very critical stage at which sometimes we say that, neurotoxic medications or so-called teratogenic drugs, which are drugs which could affect the development of the neural, central nervous system, should be avoided. So the earliest neural development actually happens in the womb of the mother itself. But however, neural development also continues to take place after conception as the child grows. So, first when you have just a disorganized collection of nerve cells or neurons, but as the child grows, there are connections that develop, that is called, myelination and the formation of synapses. So as the child learns to walk, you have got a connection which develops from the motor cortex, which is the area which is involved in controlling the movements of the limbs of the body. So there are connections that develop as the child learns to walk. Similarly, when the child learns a new language or learns the first few words, there are again few connections which develop. So probably the number of neurons after a certain element of growth, say late into the early teenage years, the number of neurons perhaps does not increase and even degenerate over a period of time. That is why we have a lot of degenerative illnesses like Alzheimer's disease, to some extent some other neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's disease, where you have got the number of neurons which dwindle over a period of time. But what probably with trained activity and with learning, what develops are the rewiring or the new connections. So you have got neurotransmitters. So you have athletes who prepare for the Olympics. What they usually do is their training schedules is that they continuously do a repetitive activity, a motor activity, so much so that the neurons and their connections become so much, well established that the action becomes ingrained in their subconscious mind. or their subconscious brain. They really don't need to think effectively to see what is the next move. Maybe you're playing a game like badminton. What is the next move that you need to do? It happens even without consciously thinking about it. While somebody who is less trained, or whose neurons have not been effectively developed and their synapses have not been wired, takes a little more effort, to get into that action. So the same thing happens even as the central nervous system or the neural system develops. So probably the structure and number remains same, but we can effectively evolve it with learning processes over time.
Thank you so much. So I know that there are several dignitaries who will have a lot of questions, so I am not taking much time. My last question to Dr. Sajida, that regarding the language, I had a quote like, if a person knows two languages known as bilingual and three languages trilingual and more than three languages multilingual, but if a person knows only one language is an American. So coming to that one, so madam, you said like in the first grade in America, US, if a child is going to the first grade, he knows in an average family at least 10,000 words, and say bit more better or upper class families, a child may be knowing 18,000 words. And you said we don't have any statistics in Kerala or our place. So is it really, I was wondering, so in US, the first grade age of that student may be 5 or 6 years. Within that time, how he is acquiring this 18,000 or 10,000 words like that? I was wondering, because in Kerala or in Malayalam, even a 5-year-old kid can be able to speak 10,000 Malayalam words during that 5 or 6 years of age. Is it really? So it was amazing. So is that because of the US, those children, they are concentrating only on his own English language in that thought process and not going for bilingual or multilingual, whether it is an advantage or disadvantage being bilingual in that aspect? Can you please elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I think there are two questions there. So on the question of, let me make it clear. It's not words that they can read. It's oral words. It's not, reading thing. I mentioned that. It's oral language. And that is partly because it's just that a child in a richer household, more educated household, the parents are talking a lot more. There's just more conversation. They may talk to the child or to each other, and they use a lot of vocabulary. And this we know, even, if you know your own friends or, just socially, you can see that you will use a lot more vocabulary, especially if the mother is more educated, right? And in the lower income families and less educated households, firstly, the parents may not have time. They may be working a lot more. They're outside the house. And even when they come home, they don't have time, or they themselves don't have the language capacity. So the child hears much less. Child may be watching television. And, there's a limited vocabulary there. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention in when they do these studies of babies listening to different languages, and one of the ways they measure, I believe, is the pupil dilation. Right? It's a non-invasive technique. But they found that if you used a TV person speaking Chinese to the baby, no, not much reaction. But if it's a real life teacher or parent, then there is reaction from the baby. So the question of the oral language is really just what the child is hearing. So the child has heard that. I'm not saying it can produce, it's not expressive necessarily, but it has heard much more. And that is a precursor for reading, right? That a lot more words. I don't know about Malayalam. I don't think these studies have been done. And your question of, okay, would you have less because you're listening to more languages? I don't know because I don't know of any study that has looked at that. Even the studies on bilingual education in the US and in, I think also in Canada, show that in the beginning stages, maybe their development of English, the L2, is not as rapid as those who are studying only in English in the beginning, 1 or 2, first 2, 3 grades. But they catch up very quickly. So by the end of elementary, the two groups of children are very similar. So you may have a little bit of retardation, not retardation, a little bit of delay if the child is learning 2 languages at the beginning. But if it's taught systematically, nothing goes wrong really later. That is the point. They'll become proficient in both. The problem in Kerala and in many parts of India and rest of the developing world is that now parents have come to believe that the only way to learn English is through extensive exposure to English through medium of instruction. Every subject must be taught in English. And if it's taught badly, children are not going to learn, and they're not going to learn Malayalam either. And then the higher order cognitive skills like problem solving, analytics and so on is really impaired. That's the issue that we are facing here. I'm not saying, I know you didn't ask this, but I'm just adding to it. I'm not saying people should not be taught English. I think they should be, because that has become an Indian language. It is the lingua franca. It is what we want to use in higher education and so on. But what is the best way to teach English? It should be a deliberate instructional program, not just putting kids in different tracks and hoping for the best. And we should really have a goal. What do we want them to learn in Malayalam? Is it going to become a heritage language where you just learn some historical things about Malayalam? Or is it going to remain a new, vibrant, living language or not, right? So, Malayalam is not going to die out. We have a long history and we have a lot of literature. But what is the role of the education system in promoting language proficiency, and in which language? I think I went beyond your question. Sorry. But
my name is 𝐁𝐚𝐬𝐢𝐿. I'm interested in teaching. That has been my profession. It was interesting listening to both the speakers. And Dr. Sajida Bashir had rightly observed, I should say, babies are used to listening and speaking. That's very true, I would say that. In this context, we would have to take into account those children who have not had the benefit of a formal education. And I would say they are the best speakers. If you go to Kovalam or Shangamugam, those children who are selling peanuts, they speak English or Spanish very well. That is one thing that I've observed, more than the students who are undergoing formal education. That is one that I have to say. And here we have to take into account another thing. That is the arrival of the migrant workers here. I have never studied Malayalam in all throughout my life. I studied Hindi. But now I have forgotten Hindi, but I'm surprised to see that with the arrival of the migrant workers, the locals in my area, I live in a village, they speak Hindi very well, but they do not know how to write Hindi, a word in Hindi. This is something that we have to understand. The migrant workers as well, they speak Malayalam very well, without studying the letters. And the Malayalis are more fortunate, I would say, in one respect, that they can pick up any language. That is one thing. Another thing I would like to ask Dr. George Velanilam is something that is very specific. In one of my visits to a school in Ernakulam, I think the school's name is the Choice School for the Differently Able. I was surprised to see many children over there, autism affected, but They had this proficiency in general knowledge, which surprised me. But if you ask them other things, there's no reply from them. But if you ask anything about the railway timetable, I am surprised that they would say the A to the Z of it. How is that possible? And in this respect, I would share one of my experiences, because you are an expert on brain study, etc. I had a fall that is from 40 foot high. And of course, that was in 1984. Even after 40 years, I was diagnosed by a doctor and said that I'd be suffering from cerebral hemorrhage. But even to this day, nothing has happened. So I would like to find out something that you can connect these things together and give me an answer. Thank you.
So the three things that you said, first was your comment on how we have adapted to the migrants' language. So I completely agree with that viewpoint that necessity is the mother of invention, even when it comes to languages. So if you have to learn a language for your day-to-day survival, you're in a new city, and unless you know what is the word for bread and what is the word for food, you probably wouldn't be able to survive. So you learn it. So that's how language adapts based on your needs. And coming to the two questions that you asked, the first is about how autism, children can have some good abilities as well. So first of all, when we address a child with autism, one of the evolving words that we use is autism spectrum disorders. So autism is an umbrella term, and it's a whole spectrum. So some of the children who are autistic perhaps will have nothing much different from the so-called, within inverted commas, normal children. And if we actually do an MRI or a CT scan for their brain, we don't find anything structurally abnormal in the children with autism. So autism, again, is a spectrum, and it is considered to be a learning disability, and there is no real answer to it. People have their own theories why it has happened. It is not to be equated with some other forms of brain insult. So you have got other insults on the brain like cerebral palsy and some developmental disorders where there is an insult to the brain during the time of maybe the birth or in the early period after birth, wherein there is some blood supply to the brain which is cut off. While in autism, at a structural level, you really don't have anything abnormal. If you do an MRI of a child with autism, it might look exactly like the child with a normal cognitive skill. So the spectrum has got wide variation. So there will be some children who have got alternate talents which are far more profound than children with the normal skills. And that is why there was a term which was used as 𝐒𝐚𝐬𝐴 syndrome. I don't want to spread out the word I because it really sounds too discriminatory. So seventh actually is a French word which says knowledgeable. So many of these children are considered to be highly knowledgeable and having alternate skills, and that is why all efforts are being made to accommodate them with the mainstream society. A lot of it is still yet to be known about the autism spectrum disorders, and when we hear the term autism, we take a sympathetic view. But what we need to understand is that we need to somehow help them to integrate with normal society and also understand that it's a spectrum. So you could have somebody who is much more profoundly skilled than you, who is considered normal, despite being in this autism spectrum. And about the third question about brain hemorrhage, which happened many years ago. So almost all human organs have got a fascinating capacity to recover and regenerate after some form of insult, because our innate instinct is to survive. So that's the same with the brain as well. So it could be very well possible that some injury which happened maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, caused a small bleed in the brain. So when there's a small bleed in the brain, usually what the location is outside the brain and outside the covering of the brain, which is considered to be called the dura or the meninges. So it is in the covering of, between the covering of the brain and the brain, that usually these sort of small bleeds happen. And then their natural history is such that some of them can resolve over a period of time. They just act, the body's mechanisms will absorb them over a period of time and not really cause any symptoms, while some of them can actually, cause a hyper-osmolar environment wherein they can draw more and more blood into it, and over a period of time, they may actually grow in size. So some of these individuals who become symptomatic or who have developed some headache or some problems due to these bleeds may not be immediately after their fall. The fall could have been very remote. It could have been few months ago, but you will develop it over a period of time. So both happens. That is, one is an innate potential to recover where the blood is completely dissolved with the body's reparative mechanisms, and the other wherein it can increase in size is also known. So it's good that you were able to recover without any form of an intervention from a medical professional. Thank you.
So this is true.
Now,
Sorry, just 1 minute. There was a lady there. But let me also answer this gentleman's question. I think there was a question about, just hang on, just 1 minute. About, I think you mentioned that, people, they go on the beach and they can learn English and Spanish. They speak very well, if I understood the question. I think we should distinguish between people being able to pick up certain languages for their livelihood, which we see all across the world. All immigrants do that. There was a Sri Lankan lady I knew. She could speak, enough to make you understand what could be done, but she hadn't studied beyond grade 4. Now, that is one thing that people learn just to get around. We should not confuse that with what we are trying to teach children, where we want them to become proficient in both languages so that they have equal chance to go into higher education and so on. So that's not the same. And I think there's often a lot of kind of loose discussion about this, which is not what we are talking about when it comes to bilingual education. What you are mentioning shows only human beings' capacity to pick up language, which is true. But some people are good at it and some people are not when they're adult stage, because you have already passed that critical stage when you can acquire a lot of languages. The critical stage is when you're young. And that is where we have to focus on how to learn.
സമയത്തിൻ്റെ ഇതുകൊണ്ട് കുറയ്ക്കുകയാണ്. അല്ല, ഇപ്പോൾ ഇത് പറഞ്ഞപ്പോൾ എൻ്റെ അമേരിക്കയിൽ ഹാർവാർഡ് യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റിയിലെ പ്രൊഫസറായിട്ടുള്ള എൻ്റെ ഒരു ശിഷ്യൻ പ്രൊഫസറാകുന്നതിന് മുമ്പ് CEO ബിസിനസ് മേഖലയിലായിരുന്നു. So in order to improve his American accent, he used to walk in the park and speak himself and corrected it. He told me. He's a writer also. Because you see, because both presentations were amazing and mutually complementary. I wish more teachers and policymakers would have been here to listen to this topic. And see, here, yesterday when I was inviting one teacher to attend this program, she told this thing. You see, she's teaching UP classes. 1ാം ക്ലാസ്സിൽ നല്ലതുപോലെ എഴുതുകയും വായിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യുന്ന കുട്ടി ഇപ്പോൾ 7 വന്നപ്പോൾ എഴുതുകയും വായിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യുന്നില്ല. ക്രിയേറ്റർ എത്ര ഭയങ്കരമായ ശ്രദ്ധയോടുകൂടിയാണ് ഈ ബ്രെയിനിൽ ഈ ഫാക്കൽറ്റി എല്ലാം ഇത്രത്തോളം സൂക്ഷ്മമായി ഇംപ്ലാന്റ് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്നത് എന്നുള്ളൊരു സാറിൻ്റെ പ്രസൻറ്റേഷനിൽ വളരെ അമേസിംഗ് ആയിട്ട് മനസ്സിലായി. പക്ഷേ നമ്മുടെ ഈ ലോജിസ്റ്റിക്സിനെ ഒരു ചോദ്യം ഇതാണ്, എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ് ഈ ഒരു ഘട്ടത്തിൽ കുട്ടി ഇത്തരത്തിൽ പ്രൊഫഷൻസി ആർജിച്ചാലും വൈ ഇറ്റ് ഫെയ്ഡ്സ് എവേ എന്നുള്ളൊരു പ്രശ്നം. 2, ഇപ്പോൾ ഞാൻ ശ്രീചിത്രയിലൊരു സർജറിക്ക് കിടക്കുമ്പോൾ, ന്യൂറോ സർജറിക്കൽ ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെൻറ്റിലൊരു പേഷ്യൻ്റാണ് ഞാൻ കിടക്കുമ്പോൾ, എൻ്റെ ഡോക്ടറിനോട് വന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു 5 വർഷത്തിന് മുമ്പ്, ഇറ്റ്സ് വെരി ഡിഫിക്കൽട്ട് സാർ, എന്നെ വിളിക്കുന്ന പശ്ചാത്തലം കൊണ്ടായിരിക്കാം സാറിൻ്റെ ഈ ഇവിടെ ട്യൂമർ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു, സാറിൻ്റെ ട്യൂമർ ഓപ്പറേറ്റ് ചെയ്ത് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ സാറിൻ്റെ ലാംഗ്വേജ് ഫാക്കൽറ്റി നഷ്ടപ്പെട്ടു പോകും, അതുകൊണ്ട് വി ആർ ഡിസ്കസിങ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു. എൻ്റെ ഇടപാട് തീർന്നു പോയി ഭ്രാന്ത് കൊണ്ട്. നമുക്ക് ലാംഗ്വേജിനെ പറ്റി നമ്മൾ ജീവിച്ചിരുന്ന കാര്യമില്ല. പിറ്റേന്ന് രാവിലെ വരെ പറഞ്ഞു, സർ വി ആർ ഗോയിങ് ടു ഡിസ്ചാർജ് യു. എൻ്റെ ജീവിതത്തിൽ ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ ആനന്ദം അനുഭവിച്ച സമയമാണ്. വെയിറ്റ് ആൻഡ് വാച്ച്. 5 മാസത്തിന് ശേഷം ഓപ്പറേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുകയും ചെയ്തു. അപ്പോൾ ഈ ചിലപ്പോൾ നമ്മുടെ മൊത്തം ലോജിസ്റ്റിക്സിനെ സർപ്രൈസ് ചെയ്യുന്ന തരത്തിൽ കുട്ടികൾ ഭാഷയുടെ സൂക്ഷ്മമായ ഇൻട്രിക്കസീസിൻ്റെ വളരെ വെർബൽ, സിൻടാക്റ്റിക്കൽ, പിന്നെ മറ്റ് പല ഭാഷാ പ്രത്യേകതകളെയും മറികടന്നുകൊണ്ട് കുട്ടികൾ ഭാഷ സുന്ദരമായി ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്ന കാണാറുണ്ട്. ഒരു കാര്യം. അപ്പോൾ അതിൻ്റെ ഈ പെഡഗോജിക് പോയിൻ്റ് ഓഫ് വ്യൂവിൽ അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു കാര്യം ഒന്നുകൂടി, ഇപ്പോൾ കഴിഞ്ഞതൊരു ദിവസം എൻ്റെ ഒരു 4 വയസ്സ് കഴിഞ്ഞ ഒരു കുട്ടി ഈ മാതൃഭൂമി ഫെസ്റ്റിവലിൽ ഒരു റൈറ്റിംഗ് പാട് തന്നിരുന്നു. അതിൻ്റെ പല എഴുതും വായിക്കുക ഇല്ലാത്ത കുട്ടിയാണ്. കാന്ന് ഒരു സൈഡിൽ വലുതായിട്ട് എഴുതിയിരുന്നു, മറ്റേ സൈഡിൽ ഗുരുവചനമാണ്, ജാതിഭേദം മതദ്വേഷം എന്നും പറഞ്ഞെഴുതിയിരിക്കുന്ന ഒരു വലുതായിട്ട് എഴുതിയിരിക്കുന്നു. ഈ കുട്ടി ഇങ്ങോട്ട് വന്ന് UKG പഠിക്കുന്ന കുട്ടിയാണ്, ഗവൺമെൻറ് സ്കൂളിൽ. കായല്ലേ ജായല്ലേ എന്നൊക്കെ പറഞ്ഞ് 2 മിനിറ്റ് കൊണ്ട് ആ കുട്ടി ഇരുന്ന് ഇത് മുഴുവൻ സാധനങ്ങളും അക്ഷരം അറിയാൻ വയ്യാത്ത കുട്ടി റിക്രിയേറ്റ് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്നു. അപ്പോൾ ഇന്ന് ഹോൾ കേരളയിൽ ഡിബേറ്റ് നടക്കുന്ന, നാളെ ഞാനും ഒരിടത്ത് ഒരു ജില്ലയിൽ പ്രസൻറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. ഈ എഴുത്തും വായനയും, ഇപ്പം മാഡം പറഞ്ഞില്ല, എഴുത്തും വായനയും നമുക്കൊരു പോളിസി, ഒരു ലാംഗ്വേജ്, 2 ലാംഗ്വേജിൻ്റെ ഡിമാൻഡ് സൊസൈറ്റിയിൽ നിന്നുണ്ടാകുമ്പോൾ ഗവൺമെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ ഭാഗത്തുനിന്ന് നമുക്കൊരു ലാംഗ്വേജ് പോളിസി ഇല്ലാത്തത് കൊണ്ട് തോന്നിയതുപോലെ അങ്ങ് ഇവിടെ പഠിപ്പിക്കുന്നു എന്നുള്ളത് കൊണ്ട് കുട്ടികൾക്ക് എല്ലാവർക്കും, ബഹുഭൂരിപക്ഷം കുട്ടികൾക്കും വീട്ടിൽ കൾച്ചർ ക്യാപിറ്റൽ ഇല്ലാത്തത് പഠിപ്പിക്കാത്ത കുട്ടികൾക്കെല്ലാം ഈ 2 ലാംഗ്വേജുകളും നഷ്ടപ്പെടുകയും അവരുടെ കൊഗ്നിറ്റീവ് ഡെവലപ്മെൻറ്റിനെ വളരെ അഡ്വേഴ്സായിട്ട് അഫക്റ്റ് ചെയ്യുകയും ചെയ്തിരുന്നു. ഇതാണ് എഴുത്തും വായനയും അറിയില്ല എന്നുള്ള ഡിബേറ്റിൽ മറന്നു പോകുന്നത്. അപ്പം എനിക്ക് അതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് പറയാനുള്ളത്, നമ്മുടെ നാട്ടിൽ ഈ ഇംഗ്ലീഷും മലയാളവും ഒരുപോലെ കുട്ടികൾക്ക് പ്രൊഫഷൻ്റ് ആവണമെന്നുള്ളൊരു പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ ഡിമാൻഡ് ഉള്ളപ്പോൾ അതിനെ ഈ ബ്രെയിൻ സയൻസിൻ്റെ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ന്യൂറോളജിക്കൽ എക്സ്പ്ലനേഷൻസിൻ്റെയോ പെഡഗോജിക്കൽ സൗണ്ടായിട്ടുള്ള ലോക മോഡലിൻ്റെയോ അടിസ്ഥാനത്തിൽ കേരളത്തിലൊരു പോളിസി ഫോർമുലേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുകയും ഇതിനെ അഡ്രസ്സ് ചെയ്യാൻ നമ്മൾ ഇന്ന് വരെ പരാജയപ്പെട്ടു. നമ്മൾ ഒന്നും പഠിക്കുന്നില്ല എന്നുള്ളതാണ് ഈ പ്രസൻറ്റേഷനിൽ നിന്ന് എനിക്ക് മനസ്സിലായത്. ഓക്കെ, താങ്ക് യു.
No more questions now. So let me conclude.
So before we finish, I'll just take a quick opinion poll among all of you. So one of the arguments against learning a new language is that if you try to learn a new language, maybe your vocabulary of the primary language will come down. Okay, like for example, if you compare your cousins from America versus your own children who know Malayalam and English, perhaps your cousins from America, their children will speak more complicated English words. So I will ask you a question. You just raise your hand. If you had the choice between learning a new foreign language, say German, versus increasing your English vocabulary by another 200 words, how many will choose option A, learning a new language? How many will choose option B, that is learning, say, 500 more English words over the next, say, 1 year? You're going to invest 1 year to learn German versus 1 year to learn 500 new English words. So who will choose to learn a new language? New language, okay. And how many would choose to expand your vocabulary further? So some of them did not choose any option. Perhaps they don't want both. So I think the opinion is equally divided. Probably equal number want to get better at the primary language and equal number want to learn a new language. So probably the message is that that getting better at your own language need not often happen at the cost of maybe learning a new language. So think further about it. Thank you very much.